Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And tonight, in our ongoing series on Medal of Honor winners, we're going to talk about Private First Class Francis Curry, who died recently at the age of 94. Private Curry was one of the last three surviving Medal of Honor winners from World War II. The other two are Charles Coolidge, who is 98, and Woody Williams, who is 96. Private Curry, who went on to become a sergeant, was awarded his Medal of Honor for his actions at Malmedy in Belgium in December of 1944. He helped immobilize 3 German tanks, wiped out a house full of Nazis, rescued 6 of his trap buddies, and saved 5 wounded men. Now, his actions took place on December 21st, 1944. And for those of you who are familiar with World War II history, 4 days before that, on December 17th, 1944, was the infamous Malmedy Massacre. At Malmedy, between 80 and 88 American troops, no one is sure how many, who were prisoners of war, were deliberately massacred by SS troops. They were shot at close range in an open field. It remains one of the most heinous acts perpetrated against American soldiers in World War II, and there's a monument to those soldiers at Malmedy. I visited it 3 years ago. Why were they massacred? No one knows for sure. The two theories prevailing are that a couple of the troops tried to escape, they were shot, and then the SS killed the remainder of the prisoners of war. The second theory is that because the Germans were on a specific mission, which we'll talk about in a little while, and they were on a tight schedule, the most expedient thing to do was to kill these prisoners. Either way, it was a brutal, heinous act, and the men in charge were tried at Dachau and sentenced to death, although none of them were ever executed for their role in the Malmedy Massacre. This all occurred in northern Belgium and was essentially the beginning of the Battle of the Bulge. The Battle of the Bulge was essentially the last-ditch German effort to trap American troops in northern Belgium, hopefully to persuade a surrender. The maneuver took place in bad weather, and the Germans nearly succeeded in completely cutting off the Americans. This was where General McAuliffe was asked to surrender at Bastogne and replied nuts. Aware that while he was temporarily in a bad position, the Germans did not have the reinforcements to sustain their advantage. But 10 days later, when the weather cleared, American air forces were able to stop the Germans, and that was essentially the last gasp German offensive in the West. The SS troops at Malmedy were a reconstituted panzer division named after Adolf Hitler. There were only 2 named after Adolf Hitler, and they were led by Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Peiper. Here is the story of the Malmedy Massacre.
The goal of the Eiffel counteroffensive was simple: split Allied forces in the Ardennes forest, part of the border between Belgium and Germany, and get over the Meuse River. This newly contested 70-mile-long forested area was named the Ghost Front, as it was unfamiliar with combat, and foggy weather was commonplace. After weeks of planning, the Germans moved into place and got ready for the surprise battle that would decide the fate of the Third Reich. Joachim Peiper's troops moved into the forest neighboring the German town of Blankenheim on the 15th of December. The combat group was split into 3 parts for the battle: the Spitze, or the spearhead, the command group, which included Peiper, the infantry, and tank leaders, and lastly, the main body of the column. At 5:30 a.m. the next day, the Battle of the Bulge began. Peiper moved his troops to Landsrath, Belgium at 11 p.m. The Kampfgruppe Peiper advanced again at 4 a.m. on the 17th, and first came in contact with enemy forces in Hansfeld, where the group murdered unarmed prisoners of war. They also killed more enemy soldiers later in Bulge. From there, they proceeded to Moederscheid, then to Schoppen, Oedenval, and Thermont. Instead of then following the planned path to Bagatelle, the combat group Peiper went by way of Highway N32, moving west toward American troops. More than halfway to Bagatelle, the Spitze spotted the B battery convoy and fired upon it. Confusion reigned in the first few moments of firing. Americans jumped from their vehicles and took cover in ditches beside the road. Survivors surrendered with little resistance and were searched, looted, and escorted north to a field near the crossroads. By 1:30, 111 American prisoners of war had surrendered and were being placed in the field 70 yards from the crossroads. The Spitze had already moved on, and responsibility for the prisoners was passed on to Major Werner Pochka. At 2:15, a German soldier standing upon a tank took deliberate aim at the mass of Americans and fired 2 shots, one on the left and right sides of the group. Many sources believe this soldier was Private First Class Georg Fleps, and that he was directly ordered to shoot by Sergeant Max Beutner, who had conversed with Pochka. Immediately after the first shots, tanks and soldiers fired into the prisoners' ranks. At this point, some captured Americans attempted to escape, but were mowed down along with the others. Following 3 minutes of intense fire, men from SS Panzer Pioneer companies entered the field and shot as many as 8 rounds into each wounded soldier who showed signs of life. Mercy shots continued for 20 minutes. However, until 4 p.m., German troops continued to fire on those lying in the field as they passed by. Once everything quieted down, those still alive attempted to escape. Many of the survivors headed west towards Malmedy and stopped in the Café Baudarway on their way. 82 Americans were found, frozen, in mid-January when Allied forces regained the area. Autopsies were performed, and doctors found that the majority of the soldiers died from head wounds administered at close range. The reason behind the massacre at the Bulge crossroads that fateful December day is greatly contested, as many of the witnesses had been killed before justice could be carried out. There is evidence arguing that the massacre was a predetermined strategy, as well as ideas that it was an event produced through disrespect for life from a small group of soldiers. Most likely, logic and emotions were combined to create the war atrocity. Statements from participants hint at orders given to German soldiers through speeches prior to the whole campaign that encouraged the troops to commit crimes and take no prisoners. The geography of the area possibly played a part in the event, as the Germans were surrounded on all sides by American forces and did not have an easy route by which to take the prisoners of war. Time constraints could have motivated the SS Panzer Regiment to kill the captives as well. Similar but smaller crimes had already been committed earlier in the Kampfgruppe Peiper advance. On May 16, 1946, Americans attempted to deliver justice to the SS troops that were involved in the killings of the 82 Americans. The SS were in violation of the Geneva Conventions and charged that they willfully, deliberately, and wrongfully permit, encourage, aid, abet, and participated in the killing, shooting, ill treatment, abuse, and torture of members of the armed forces of the United States of America. Out of 74 suspects, 43 were given death sentences, 22 were sentenced to life imprisonment, and 8 had between 10 to 20 years in prison. A few aspects of the Dachau trials were unjust. Some prisoners were tricked into giving statements before the trial, and there were accusations of abuse. Less than 3 minutes were spent on deciding each case, and only 30 of those accused for the massacre were actually involved that day. Luckily for the Germans, their defense attorney, Willis M. Everett Jr., worked hard, grabbing at far-out claims to prove his client's innocence. He succeeded when the last man in prison, Joachim Peiper, was released in December of 1956. 20 years later, Peiper was killed by the Avengers, a French rebel group. As it has been said, justice was the last casualty of the Malmedy Massacre.
Well, that's the Malmedy Massacre. Private Curry's actions took place during the same engagement 4 days later, and here is how his Medal of Honor citation reads. Francis S. Curry, rank Private First Class, Company K, born June 29, 1925, Loch Sheldrake, New York, entered service at Hurleyville, New York, date of issue 7/27/1945, place date Malmedy, Belgium, 21 December 1944, organization U.S. Army, Division 120th Infantry, 30th Infantry Division. He was an automatic rifleman with the 3rd Platoon defending a strong point near Malmedy, Belgium on 21 December 1944 when the enemy launched a powerful attack. Overrunning tank destroyers and anti-tank guns located near the strong point, German tanks advanced to the 3rd Platoon's position and after prolonged fighting forced the withdrawal of this group to a nearby factory. Sergeant Curry found a bazooka in the building and crossed the street to secure rockets, meanwhile enduring intense fire from enemy tanks and hostile infantrymen who had taken up a position at a house a short distance away. In the face of small arms, machine gun and artillery fire, he, with a companion, knocked out a tank with 1 shot. Moving to another position, he observed 3 Germans in the doorway of an enemy-held house. He killed or wounded all 3 with his automatic rifle. He emerged from cover and advanced alone to within 50 yards of the house, intent on wrecking it with rockets. Covered by friendly fire, he stood erect and fired a shot which knocked down half of one wall. While in his forward position, he observed 5 Americans who had been pinned down for hours by fire from the house and 3 tanks. Realizing that they could not escape until the enemy tank and infantry guns had been silenced, Sergeant Curry crossed the street to a vehicle, where he procured an armful of anti-tank grenades. These he launched while under heavy enemy fire, driving the tankmen from the vehicle into the house. He then climbed onto a half-track in full view of Germans and fired a machine gun at the house. Once again changing his position, he manned another machine gun, whose crew had been killed. Under his covering fire, the 5 soldiers were able to retire to safety. Deprived of tanks and with heavy infantry casualties, the enemy was forced to withdraw. Through his extensive knowledge of weapons and by his heroic and repeated braving of murderous enemy fire, Sergeant Curry was greatly responsible for inflicting heavy losses in men and material on the enemy, for rescuing 5 comrades, 2 of whom were wounded, and for stemming an attack which threatened to flank his battalion's position. Here is Albany Television 6 years ago on Veterans Day with a report on Francis Curry.
It was truly an honor for me to get to spend the afternoon with Sergeant Curry. He is the definition of a true American hero. 3 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star, and of course, the most prestigious of them all, a Medal of Honor. As you said, he's one of only 8 surviving Medal of Honor recipients from World War II, and he shared with me the details of the battle that led to that medal. On December 21st, 1944, Frank Curry was just 19 years old.
I had 3 months of 3.5 months of combat before that day, and 5.5 months after that day. And to me, it was just another day.
Frank and his platoon were guarding a bridge near Malmedy, Belgium, when German tanks advanced on their position.
People don't realize how thin we were spread down there, and how close we come to lose in that war.
Under heavy fire, his small crew was forced to retreat to an abandoned factory.
We ran from window to window firing at the Germans, so they think there was a lot of guys there.
Frank found a bazooka in the factory, but the ammunition for it was across the street. He charged through gunfire to retrieve it, and on his way back, he helped a number of other American soldiers who were caught in the crossfire.
So, and of course, that I managed to disable them 3 tanks with a grenade. Then I used the machine gun to cover the last couple of guys so they could get out.
But Frank didn't get out with them. He returned back to the factory where 5 other soldiers were pinned, 2 of which were wounded.
I've never been so proud of guys in my whole life as I am of them guys.
After finding an abandoned Jeep, they loaded up the injured and decided to plow through.
I said, I'll ride shotgun on this rear wheel that they had on the Jeep, and if we're challenged by the Germans, I'll hop off and I'll cover you, and you guys just take off.
They all got out alive that day, but Frank was shot 3 times during his 9 months in combat, and even that, he makes light of.
Doctor takes a look at it. He says, that's a nice clean one. Band-aid, Band-aid, back you go.
He was awarded the Medal of Honor while he was still overseas. He also has a Silver Star and 3 Purple Hearts. In the nearly 70 years since he left Europe, Frank has continued to help other soldiers as a benefits counselor at the VA. He is a true American hero. In fact, he's got his own action hero to prove it. So when the G.I. Joe folks called, what'd you think?
I thought it was kind of a joke.
In 1988, Hasbro created a 12-inch version of Frank at age 19, complete with a miniature bazooka, automatic rifle, mini grenades, and of course, his Medal of Honor.
Well, that was just a one day of them 9 months.
One day that will forever be an important part of American history. Although it's not in the official citation, I think it's very important to mention, and a lot of researchers and historians have said that his actions on that day actually helped end the war when it did. Because had those Germans been able to get across that bridge, they would have been coming into a part that was already secured by the Allied forces, and it may have pushed back the end of the war several weeks. He actually joined the military when he was 17, went into training, and he had to wait because they couldn't be sent overseas until they turned 19. So he went almost right after his birthday, and he said, I was from a small town. I wanted to go. I wanted to defend my country. And, you know, in the 9 months he was in battle, he saved countless lives. He was awarded this medal for those 5 that day. But as he said, it was 9 months of constant combat.
Well, I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps. Sergeant Curry, our gratitude is boundless. We can never repay the debt we owe you.